And there's intimacy on the radio, and there's naturalness on the radio that can never be replicated on TV. The marvelous resurgence of radio as a political force in this country.
News-related radio programming is evolving.
There's a huge hole in our dialogue that can be filled by the synthesis of traditional radio and the freedom that comes from a live podcast. You're about to experience Cowboy State Politics live. Here we go.
Hello again, and welcome to American Top 40. I'm Casey Kasem, and I want to thank Dave. Debuting this week at number 36.
Good morning, my friends, and welcome to another fantastic installment from very high above all the puerile and bombastic idiots in the mainstream Wyoming press. This is Cowboy State Politics. I, of course, am your illustrious host, David Iverson, firmly ensconced behind the silver Cowboy State Politics microphone and broadcasting to you from the base of the Bighorns at the Cowboy State Politics Studio in Sheridan, Wyoming. Good morning, my friends, and welcome to the program. Happy Wednesday. We begin this morning with the Washington Compost. Evidently, they're mystified. Spooky music. The Washington Post is mystified by the drop in fentanyl seizures at the U.S.-Mexico border. And I quote, the Washington Post said that the massive drop in fentanyl seizures at the southern border is mysterious, and that it is a more complex story than one would think after President Donald Trump has made it a point to crack down on border security, as well as fentanyl trafficking into the United States. The outlet suggested that the Trump administration's policies, such as threatening tariffs on China as well as Mexico to curb fentanyl, could have little to do with the drop in fentanyl, and claimed, quote, new data suggest a more complex story. This year, there has been a marked decrease in fentanyl seizures at the border, with a decrease also being shown before Trump took office. Of course they can't allow Trump to have any credit in this whatsoever. It has to be more complex than the Trump administration is making it out to be, because if it made sense, well, then the Trump administration would have all of the credit. You see, when the media wants you to think that something else is afoot, they call it more complex. That's their way of avoiding any sort of common sense. So, for example, if you shut down the southern border and you prevent migrants and drug traffickers and cartels from crossing the border at will, then maybe there will be a decrease in the stuff they carry with them. You see, it has to be more complex for the Washington Post because that would make sense. The article continues. The outlet went on to talk about the Sinaloa cartel woes happening in Mexico, where there have been two factions of the cartels attacking one another, and Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum, sounds like a heck of a Mexican name if you ask me, Sheinbaum, has been targeting the cartel leaders, which would make the manufacturing of fentanyl more difficult. So in other words, it's not shutting down the southern border. It's because the cartels are too busy fighting amongst themselves, and they've just forgotten about their cash cow. They've decided that they're not going to do business anymore, and instead just go to war. But what the Washington Post fails to recognize is that fails to admit, recognize means that maybe they know they're doing wrong, but they fail to admit, and they refuse to admit, that the Trump administration is actually doing a good job, that we went from a veritably closed-off border to one that was wide open, that allowed millions of people to cross at will. Now, the authors of this Washington Post piece went on to cite that there are signs that many Mexican based fentanyl cooks are having difficulty obtaining more key precursor chemicals. So now it's not just that they're fighting amongst themselves, it's that they don't have the materials to make the drugs. Yeah, as if that's ever been a problem in the past. But evidently it is for the Washington Post, simply because they cannot allow Trump to have any credit whatsoever in solving any problems. Interestingly, Interestingly enough, it is also the Washington Post, owned by Jeff Bezos, that has recently cracked down on their editorial board. There have been a couple of stories that I've talked about on the podcast that say that Jeff Bezos has said, if you're not going to champion free markets and liberty, then you're out of the Washington Post editorial board. But I think that a lot of this is kind of, what I want to call it, virtue signaling to the Trump administration. It was Jeff Bezos and old Zuck and tech, their tech friends that were at the inauguration. Remember, it was Mark Zuckerberg who said that this censorship online and all of this content monitoring, that it was going to come to a stop. Well, most reports have shown that that isn't even close to the case. It could be the same thing with the Washington Post, in that Jeff Bezos' crackdown on the editorial board was more just virtue signaling, because now they can't admit at all that perhaps Trump has done a good job. Now, drone flights, as well as an increased troop presence on the border from the Trump administration policy, may also serve as a deterrent for drug traffickers wanting to travel with fentanyl across the border. Now, it's not the cause. No. The police presence, the drones, all of the things that would make it unwise for a criminal to commit a criminal act. Those are not the reason why fentanyl has dropped. Not at all. You see, for liberals, deterrence never works. That's the avenue to which they can get their soft on crime policies through. And I mean, this goes to the larger point of the Democrat agenda, that they don't want to have any personal responsibility. They don't want any criminals to be responsible for anything that they do, because it decreases the influence of their social justice agenda. If society can't be held responsible for the bad things that they do, well, then the individuals have to be responsible. And as we all know, when you screw up, you need to take responsibility for what you do. And I mean, that's criminals as well as everybody else. So the Washington Post can continue to be mystified in why crime is down along the southern border. And, the Trump administration will just keep doing what they're doing. Now, on today's program, we've actually got a pretty busy program. In the second hour, I've got a pretty interesting interview with a guy named Jim Paff. Jim Paff is the president of the Conservative Caucus, a national organization that claims to champion conservative policies. And they've been doing that since 1974. Well, I've got a pretty extensive interview with him, and we'll bring that to you in the second hour. And then a number of different stories that we didn't get to yesterday, one of which is absolutely terrifying. And, Agent 29 and I were talking about this before the show. AI. Now, we brought you a story, I think it was last week maybe, of how some of these chat bots have refused to turn themselves off when they've been told to. Well, I've got another story that says that chatbots are lying to the people that programmed them, and they're actually copying their data to other servers to prevent being shut down. Pre-crime, anyone? Maybe AI has gone past our influence. Maybe we should tail off on one of these things and pull the plug, if that's even possible anymore. So lots to do on today's program. But next up, a segment that we haven't done for, too long.
That's great.
Things that go boom. Now, as it turns out, the laws we have on the books are already working. From the Daily Wire, the Colorado attacker planned mass shooting, but he couldn't buy a gun because he's an illegal immigrant. And I quote, The man accused of using a makeshift flamethrower and Molotov cocktails to attack a demonstration in support of hostages in Gaza originally planned to use a gun, according to Boulder County officials. Boulder County District Attorney Michael Daughtry said in a press conference Monday afternoon that Mohammed Sabri Solomon attempted to purchase a gun to attack demonstrators, but was blocked by gun laws. Now, wait a minute. I thought that anybody could get a gun, that we don't have any laws that prevent criminals from doing criminal things. Apparently, that's wrong. Solomon planned the attack for at least a year, according to authorities. His initial plan involved using a firearm. He took a concealed carry class to learn how to shoot, but when he attempted to buy a gun, he was stopped because his visa had expired, Daughtry said. Documents filed in state court say that Solomon, quote, had to use Molotov cocktails after he was denied the purchase of a gun due to him not being a legal citizen. Solomon researched on YouTube how to make Molotov cocktails as well as other things. And my guess is that, he probably contacted the right people. I mean, he probably said, Googled, how do I buy a gun? And he was told, well, you actually have to be a citizen. The suspect is an Egyptian national who is in the United States illegally, according to the Department of Homeland Security, Department spokeswoman Tricia McLaughlin. And she said that Solomon is in the United States on an expired visa, as well as his entire family. I heard on the radio yesterday when I was running errands that ICE agents have detained his entire family, his wife and his kids, because all of them are in the country illegally. I mean, this is just another example of the failure of the open borders. While the Washington Post is mystified how fentanyl deaths and fentanyl seizures at the U.S. border are down, they also apparently are mystified how an illegal immigrant who planned a terrorist attack, or carried out a terrorist attack, rather, wasn't able to buy a gun. This completely flies in the face of any of the arguments made on the left as to why we need more gun control, which is interesting because Jamie Raskin decided that gun control, after this attack, he went on to say that we need more gun control. Now, there was an interesting piece on, I think it was Jesse Waters, where he had a great monologue about this. Let's go ahead and take a listen to this, and then we'll talk about it.
Certain that if you want to build a wall, you're racist, but doesn't want to make any assumptions when Muslims burn Jews with flamethrowers. The New York Times didn't like calling the terrorist an illegal, so they put illegal in quotes. NBC blamed the attack on Musk because Musk sells flamethrowers, even though this guy didn't even buy one. He made it in his garage. Over at MSNBC, they called the illegal Egyptian Muslim a white male.
There's an individual that's taken into custody. He's a white male. Whether or not that's the person that police ultimately arrested and will ultimately charge in this crime, a bit of a question at this time.
Democrats were most concerned, obviously, with Republicans pouncing.
I believe that you will see Republicans blaming anti-Semitism on the left. I think that you might even see some Democrats parroting Republican talking points.
But Democrats were the pouncers. The terrorists used matches and gasoline, so naturally Raskin called for gun control.
We are still in the midst of a gun violence epidemic, so we need to be acting with due concern for human life. This is why, of course, we have been fighting for a universal violent criminal background check. We are for a ban on military-style assault weapons in the country. Our lax gun laws are a danger to everybody.
From the arson at Governor Shapiro's house to the executions in D.C. to this Molotov cocktail hate crime, we're watching the left go crazy. But they can't antagonize the Hamas wing of their party because they need them for political power. So they distract you with labels and wonder what the motivation could be and pivot to gun control. They aren't honest enough to admit they opened the border to danger. They created an environment with no consequences. BLM rioters bailed out. Antifa charges dropped. Ivy League agitators not only tolerated, but celebrated. They think they can get away with anything because they have been. But this is all about the change.
Hopefully so. But Jesse Waters misses one point. Now, he's right about everything that he's saying, that all the Democrats want to misdirect any logical argument. They can't use any common sense. They don't want you to figure out what's going on. But it's more than just the Democrats not wanting to punish anybody. It's more than them just wanting an open border. It's more than them thinking that every illegal person that crosses the border will vote for them. It's more than them wanting a permanent majority in Congress. It's more than all of that. And let me tell you exactly what I think that it is. There's a couple of college professors named Frances Fox Piven, and I can't remember her partner's name, Cloward, but Cloward and Piven wrote several different books, and on their way to create a basically Marxist society, and the idea was to overwhelm the system, top down, bottom up, and inside out. And it's exactly what Lenin did in 1917, that you create an environment that overwhelms all of the existing structure, that there's so much chaos going on that nothing that you have, the police force, the military, nothing that you have can handle it, that you can't right the ship because there's too much. Now, Cloward and Piven, they talked about social welfare benefits, that you create such a desire to have those benefits and such a demand on the system that it collapses in amongst itself, so that you have so many people that are demanding benefits that the entire thing collapses, and then you have to rebuild it. Now, this has been an agenda for the left for a really long time. If you're a longtime viewer of Glenn Beck's program, he talked about the Fabian socialists. A lot of our public leaders, or our presidents and leaders around the world, were Fabian socialists. Tony Blair in England, George W. Bush, believe it or not. I mean that guy. I don't know how he made it through college, but he did. Anyway, they were all members of the Fabian socialists. That one of their stated goals is to remold the world closer to the heart's desire. In other words, overwhelm the existing system and make it into whatever you want it to be. And so, whether it's the Fabian socialists or whether it's the Cloward and Piven strategy, the idea is to overwhelm whatever system that you have there. So just look at all of the chaos that the Biden administration and the Democrats created. They've pretty much delegitimized our entire court system by putting a number of very liberal judges on the bench. That it's worse than not just punishing criminals. It's actually ignoring everything. And we've even seen it in Wyoming. You can't sue anybody because apparently nobody has any standing. If you're a taxpayer and you've been overcharged and you sue the county because they're not taking, proper steps to audit their finances, the court says, yeah, you don't have any standing. If your child has been transitioned in school and you sue the school district, yeah, you don't have any standing. If you sue for anything, you don't have any standing. All of the lawsuits that followed the 2020 election, they were all thrown out of court because the Trump administration didn't have standing. And so there is no redress for grievances, really, with anything. And so what are you left to do? I know a lot of people that get fed up, and in private conversation, they just say, well, I don't know. Maybe that's the reason why we have guns. And while that's hyperbole, I don't think that the sentiment is too far off from what the Democrats want. The Democrats have always wanted chaos because they can clamp down. And when they clamp down, they can seize more and more power and, remake it into whatever they want. And I've got another story here deeper in the stack of stuff talking about pre-crime. You remember the movie Minority Report, the terrifying one where you were arrested for crimes you hadn't yet committed? Well, we are moving faster and faster towards what the Democrats want. We've got chaos. We had chaos on the southern border. We have chaos in the courts. It's one thing after another. But the whole point, and this is what the Biden administration was planning, thank God we got President Trump when we did, is to just completely overwhelm the system and allow the Democrat Party to seize more power. Don't think that, and you don't think that that's possible? Look to Germany pre-World War II. One of the very first things that Hitler did when he was legally elected is he got a whole bunch of people. You hear them referred to as the brown shirts. So their job was to create chaos, create so much chaos so that the people cry out, please, God, somebody stop it. Please stop all of this stuff that's going on. Stop the fentanyl that's coming across the border. Stop all the illegal immigration. Stop the crime that is not getting punished. Stop the courts who aren't punishing anybody. And when the people cry loud enough, the left will clamp down. And when they do, you will lose your liberty. And that is what the Democrats are after. It sounds like it's a far-fetched strategy, but just think about all the places in our country that are in chaos. It seems like a clear plan to me.
You left out stop the Freedom Caucus.
Yes, we have to stop the chaos that the Freedom Caucus is putting on all of us. But my friends, we have to be active in our own government. I was going to cover this a little bit later on in the program, but I was at the Ranchester City Council last night, or Town Council last night, and they were voting on the budget. Now, the councilors that had showed up, there was 3 of them. There was the mayor, Pete Clark, there was Brian Helfrich, and then there was another guy. But there was 2 members of the city council that were not there. Why run for office if you're not going to show up at a meeting? But anyway, one of the city council members was apparently attending the meeting on Zoom, though nobody saw her, nobody could hear her vote, and we never even knew if she was actually on Zoom or not. Well, they were voting on 3rd reading on the budget, and you didn't hear the councilwoman that was on Zoom vote, yet it was very clear and not announced that she did vote. After the meeting, I went up and asked the Ranchester mayor how any of this was legal. And here's a piece of that conversation. Play cut number 3.
Yeah, we may have to just not allow extra audio equipment in here, just like we had feedback.
Well, that had nothing to do with that. That had nothing to do with that.
And I don't know what it has to do with.
Okay, so
we didn't allow other equipment in here. We've never had any feedback.
No, it's not that.
Feedback problems.
Okay, so pause real quick.
So my question.
So what's going on there is the town marshal, which I don't know why he has any say in this at all. I don't even know why he was speaking, except that he thinks that he's more important than he actually is. But anyway, he was trying to tell me that the reason you couldn't hear the other councilwoman is because of all of the feedback with their audio system. And I was telling him, look, it is not my recorder that's causing your feedback at all, really. But that's what's going on. So go ahead and continue.
My question is, how was that vote legal?
It's legal because we've done it in the past.
Okay, well, that doesn't make it legal. So is there a statute that allows...
There's a statute that doesn't allow it.
Okay, all right. It's hard to hear what he says, but he says it's legal because we did it before.
Statute that doesn't allow it.
Okay, so the last part of that, he backs up and he says, well, it's legal because we did it before, and there isn't a statute that says we can't do it. I've never heard of anything like this. Have you, Agent 29?
I haven't. The way I heard it is it says he actually agreed with you at the very end. Mm-hmm. So there is a statute that says we can't do it.
Yeah. I don't know. It's absolutely a circus, and that's some pretty raw audio. I got it last night, recorded it last night, and didn't have enough time to work on it. But if you listen to the podcast, I'll have that thing cleaned up so you can hear what he says a little bit clearer. But think about it. That's a small town council that's not even following the law. If you run for elected office, you don't get to vote unless you show up. There's no way. There is no law that says you can engage in proxy voting. It's not a private organization. It's a public town council. And if the public is not able to hear how their elected officials vote, that vote's not legal. But yet, they went ahead and conducted business anyway. So what I'm getting at here is that it appears public officials don't think that they have to follow the law. And we see this all across the breadth and scope of government.
So that's pretty disturbing. But to me, the really disturbing part is, and I've seen it happen with you and with me both, numbers of times we walk in with a recorder
to
a public meeting, and they panic. You can't have that on here. Look at the problems that were caused at the legislature.
The high capacity
level.
assault microphones.
They like to work in the dark.
Yes, they do. And, thank God we have the First Amendment. And that's going to be, and at the end of that soundbite, you can't hear it, but because I don't think I included this part. But at the end of it, he says something like, well, I'm sure I'll end up on your blog. And of course, I corrected him. It's not a blog. It's number 35 on the list of 100 podcasts you need to listen to in the entire country. I can't, go let an opportunity go by. But anyway, I said at the end.
Hello again, and welcome to American Top 40. I'm Casey Kasem, and I want to thank Dave, debuting this week at number 36.
Anyway, so at the end of it, I say, yeah, I'm pretty sure you're going to end up on my show. And then I walked away. But absolutely incredible. Now, how does this play into what I was talking about before? Well, you have elected officials at all levels of government under the mistaken impression that they don't have to follow the law. And why? How did they come to that assumption? Well, it's because for the last 4 or 5 years, they haven't had to follow the law. And when they are held accountable, or not, as the case may be, nothing happens. Nothing happens at all. Let me give you a perfect example. So I run a story on the Senate vice president saying that he absolutely log rolled a vote, and nothing happens. What about Dan Zwanitzer in the legislature? I had him absolutely dead to rights on voter fraud. Big report. It actually came up in the legislature for a vote. And what did they do? Nothing. What did the Secretary of State do? Nothing. And I'm not talking about, this was before Chuck Gray was in office. It was Ed Buchanan. But he shirked his responsibility and kicked it to the legislature when the proper place would have been the Attorney General. Not that the Attorney General would have done anything.
I think in keeping with that, if you do try to do something, and God bless Chuck Gray, our Secretary of
Absolutely.
State, he's been trying to do something about these things. He's referred all sorts of anomalies on up the channels. And not only has he been ignored in that regard, but then it's turned around, he's the problem. He's the troublemaker.
Yep.
And that just discourages anybody else. What can we do, I could go ahead and I've felt it myself. I could go ahead and report this, and I could go ahead and try to pursue it, but it's going to go right to the Attorney General, and it's going to die right there. So what's the point?
Exactly. There were, Cowboy State Politics broke the story that there were 16 election-related cases that had been forwarded to the Attorney General for investigation that she did absolutely nothing with. And admittedly, in that report, there were, complaints of varying degrees of severity, but there were a couple of them in there that were actually pretty serious, and the Attorney General did nothing with them. So, the hopelessness that you brought up, Agent 29, is exactly what the left wants us to go through. That they want us in a situation where we feel hopeless and that there's nothing that we can do, and so we have to rely on them. Help me, please, somebody stop this. We'll have more when we come back. You are listening to Cowboy State Politics Live. You can listen to the program on YouTube, on Facebook, on X, on Rumble, pretty much everywhere. It's almost like I'm omnipresent. If you miss an episode of Cowboy State Politics Live, you can always go to the live replay, which is located at the website, cowboystatepolitics.com, under the live replay button. You can listen to Cowboy State Politics Live every Tuesday through Friday at 8 a.m. You can listen to the Cowboy State Politics podcast anywhere that you get your podcasts. iHeartRadio, iTunes, TuneIn, Really, any of them will work, but the easiest place is just to go to the website, cowboystatepolitics.com. There you can find all of the shows, as well as any of the articles that I might bring up during the course of a program. That way, if your name is Joe Biden and you can't remember if you had your pudding today, well, I probably can't help you with that, but I can definitely tell you why you should have never ran for president. And now, back to our program. Welcome back to the program, Cowboy State Politics, live on YouTube, Facebook, X, and on Rumble. And, of course, don't forget the Cowboy State Politics podcast, which will be published shortly after today's live episode. You know, maybe one of the reasons why we feel so helpless is that government has been on autopilot for so long, and when we try to do something, when we try to make a change, when we elect people that promise to make changes and then they're unable to, and maybe the answer is as simple as the government has been on autopilot for so long, and there are so many systems in place that we're just unable to make any changes. And again, this is one of those things that does happen in Wyoming, even though we're told over and over and over and over again that doesn't happen in Wyoming. That's not a problem. And another case is in a report by WyoFile this morning. Well, actually, it was posted last night, but it's entitled "Wyoming Freedom Caucus Plans on Doging the State Budget." Now, first, before we get into the piece, why would we want to do that? Well, because every level of government has waste, fraud, and abuse, and all levels of government, state government, city government, federal government, they've been on autopilot for so long, and there's so much spending that it's become, just a bloated mess.
I wanted to say something about the autopilot.
Yeah.
In Wyoming, that is extremely a bad problem because of what we call these coffee cans. All these organizations.
What do you mean? Before you get in there, what do you mean by coffee can?
Yeah, well, I'm getting there. All of these organizations basically are trust fund babies, and they operate when something was set up. They they being the legislature, put aside a sum of money, and then the interest that comes off of that funds whatever board or measure that they're supposed to go to. Theoretically, yes, the legislature still has the opportunity to go back. But when you've got 700 of those things out there,
yeah,
there's no way you can keep up with all of them. They don't have to come apply for funding. It's off budget. It's on autopilot. And you would think it'd be easy to go in and try to correct those things, but it's hard.
Well, here's how that happens, right? We have all of these different organizations. Let's see here. Let's just pick one of them. The Wildlife Trust Fund. I don't know if that's the exact terminology for it, but anyway, the way it comes before the legislature is, hey, we've got this great program, and they do great work, and we want to make sure that program exists in perpetuity. So what they do is they take a giant chunk of money and they put it in a trust fund. And the argument is, well, we put this money in there, and then the program can operate off of the interest, and then we won't even have to question whether or not it's going to be around. The problem with that is it removes it out of the budget. Here's why that's an issue. Because if it is a budgetary item, then whatever agency that is has to come before the Appropriations Committee and say, hey, we want this same amount of funding for this project, and here's why you should give it to us, and here's all the fantastic work that we've done, and it's really, really essential. Well, when you create a trust fund, it allows that program to operate independently, and they don't have to go to the legislature anymore and request the money. And so just think about this. We're not talking about a trust fund of a couple of $1,000s. We're talking about a trust fund of several $1,000,000, 20 million, $40 million. And the interest that is generated off of that 20 or $40 million continues to increase. And it just serves that agency's purposes if they don't spend all their money, because it builds the corpus of that trust fund, and then they get more and more interest. And with more and more money available, that program continues to expand. I mean, it's almost like a tumor.
Yeah, the University of Wyoming is another good example.
Oh, that's a great example.
They have these very, very deep pockets, and they don't need us. You know, yeah, we give them some money, and we can whine and complain about how that money is spent, but all they've got to do is say change the name of it, move it around. It's almost impossible to do anything. Now, this sounds pretty defeatist, right?
Well, I mean, I think that you got good reason to feel that way.
Yeah, but I don't feel that way. I feel like we're really going to make a difference. It won't happen overnight. It won't happen this budget, but we'll start making a difference. In the last budget, and I've mentioned this before, the Department of Health wanted $100,000 to shore up a failing snack bar in one of its facilities.
The Department of Health needs a snack bar.
You can't believe well, there's a long... You can't believe the pushback that came at trying to take that out of the budget. It's every little thing you do is a fight, and you're hurting somebody. You're taking some money out of somebody's mouth, and it's just.
Well, how dare you? How dare you even suggest that the important work that these people are doing isn't paid for? I mean, honestly, why do you hate people? Oh, wait, don't answer that question.
You want the whole list? Or just the top 10?
Well, a good example of that, and you brought up education with the University of Wyoming, but another good example is all of the money that we spend on schools. Have you ever been to Farson? I mean, I understand if you don't remember if you've been to Farson or not, because if you blink, you're going to miss it. They do have incredible ice cream, though. There is a really, really tasty ice cream outfit there. But it's not Farson itself. It's the Farson School. That thing is incredible. Now, I don't know exactly how many people live in Farson, but it can't be more than a couple of hundred. But the school they have built there, it's $10 million, $20 million worth, and it is way bigger than that little town ever needs. And how they got it was the state of Wyoming had a tremendous amount of money for various reasons, but there was a whole bunch of money to spend on schools. And the thinking in the legislature was, if we don't spend this now, well, we're never going to be able to. So we got to spend it everywhere. And so the state of Wyoming went on this school building spree, and tremendous amounts of waste. Another example is the shop building in Ten Sleep. Now, I'm not saying anything about, the very nice school in Ten Sleep they have. I like it. It's nice. It's pretty. But here's one thing that happened. When they were building the shop building, they got all of the lights installed in it. And I know this because a friend of mine was the contractor that was doing all the electrical and the plumbing in that building. But they got all the lighting done, all the plumbing done, all of that. And the shop teacher came in and he said, I don't like the lights. And so they took out all of the brand new lights and replaced them with different brand new lights. And the ones that they took out, they were just tossed by the side of the building, and they didn't do anything with them. And the problem with that is we have a tremendous amount of waste in state government, and it shows up in all different forms, which is why I absolutely think that we do need a Doge department.
One other quick one that happened here in Sheridan, they went in and redid a grade school. And they got it all done. They landscaped it. They brought in all of the sod and laid it all and everything. But they hadn't put in a sprinkler system yet. And the sod sit there and burned up.
Oh, God. Well, so it burned up just in the heat?
Yeah, it just dried up. There was no way to water the sod. So all the money they invested in that was thrown away. And I know this because the guy that lives next to it used to be a school district honcho,
right,
in South Dakota, and he was livid. He said, I can't believe. He said, you people here just have way too much money.
So I'm looking for a soundbite that you sent me, Agent 29, a couple of days ago about a school over in Campbell County. and I can't seem to find it. But basically, the school is way over budget, like to the order of millions and millions of dollars. And the question came up in the committee: "Oh, wait a minute. Why are you like 3 times the price that you told us it was going to be?" And the answer was, "Well, I mean, we just maybe you can talk about it because you sent the soundbite to me."
I don't know that I can really add much to it. It was actually Rob Geringer that.
Hey, even a blind squirrel finds a nut
yes.
every now and again.
Yeah, but the whole thing was kind of funny because they didn't want to talk about how we got to where we are from the very beginning. They said, but we're ahead of schedule. So Chairman Bill Landon, jumps in there and says, well, that's a good thing. That's good news. And Rob says, well, how come it's costing 3 times what it should? Oh, well, the job site is 45 miles out.
That's what he says. Yeah.
So one of the problems with that is here is an organization, the construction department, that is responsible for billions of dollars worth of construction, and they can't get a bid accurate to within.
No.
It's either negligence or gross incompetence, and I don't know which it is.
Probably a combination of the two.
Everywhere you turn, and it's just kind of overwhelming. But we are making progress. We do have an opportunity to make some difference, and it won't, like I said before, it won't come overnight. It's going to take some time. It's going to take re-electing some good people, and trust me, they're gonna come after us hard.
Well, of course they are, because you're threatening their piggy bank. And that's what it all boils down to. We've lived so fat off the hog for so long that when you try to start, enacting cuts, a good example is what happened before Senate File 69 was passed. The Cheyenne mayor had the fire trucks surround the Capitol building because we're going to have to fire all the firemen. That we're going to have to cut government. We're going to fire teachers, and we're going to fire policemen and firemen. It was absolutely ridiculous.
It was hyperbole.
It was hyperbole, according to Amy Edmonds. When the truth is that the amount of cuts that every county was going to have to make, honestly, were pretty negligible. I think here in Sheridan County, what was it, like 5.8% or something like that? But anyway, a really small amount. And the truth is, there isn't a budget anywhere that couldn't sustain a 10% cut. And we're complaining about, 4 and 5%. There was one county, probably a couple of counties, that Senate File 69 only amounted to like $70,000 or $100,000. I mean, just a ridiculously low amount. So all of this is hyperbole. Sorry, Amy Edmonds. But there is an interesting piece in Wildpile, and it's entitled Wyoming Freedom Caucus Plans on Dodging the State Budget. And it's basically an interview with Appropriations Chairman John Baer. But the reason I bring this up is the reaction from a legislator. Listen to this. And I quote, "Meanwhile, a lawmaker with the most experience on the Appropriations Committee said he's skeptical of the value of state lawmakers seeking to imitate the federal government. Quote, I think it's insulting, frankly. Jackson Democrat Senator Mike Kangaroo Giroux told Wildfile, it's just stealing a bad idea from Donald Trump and trying to impose it on Wyoming. Why is it bad? Why is it bad to look at the places where you're wasting money? Why is it bad to critically examine the state budget? Why is it bad to eliminate those things that we don't need? Well, it's not. Wildfile continues. Lawmakers have done a quality job of making government as lean, quote, government as lean and efficient as we can make it, Kangaroo said, adding that political buzzwords like Doge obscure that spending wisely. That spending wisely can save money in the long run. Okay. Quote, I think about early childhood education. Study after study after study shows when we spend on early childhood education, we save on K-12 education. It's a fact, he said. Why is it a fact that spending more money on education creates a better educational outcome? The test scores prove the reverse, that when you spend more money, you actually get a lower quality education. That's why schools like Harvard are having to teach remedial classes. Harvard, of all places. It used to be the pinnacle of post-secondary education that you were pretty darn talented if you got into Harvard, that you're a pretty smart guy. But now they have to teach remedial courses. Now, Bill Maher went after this on his Friday program, and this is a pretty long soundbite, and we're not going to play all of it, but just listen to what he says. And this is coming from a liberal. Cut number 2.
And finally, Newell, as an Ivy League graduate who knows the value of a liberal education, I have one piece of advice for the youth of America. Don't go to college. And if you absolutely have to go, don't go to an elite college, because as recent events have shown, it just makes you stupid. There are few, if any, positives to come out of what happened in Israel, but one of them is opening America's eyes to how higher education has become indoctrination into a stew of bad ideas, among them the simplistic notion that the world is a binary place where everyone is either an oppressor or oppressed. In the case of Israel, oppressors being babies and bubbas. The same students who will tell you that words are violence and silence is violence were very supportive when Hamas terrorists went on a rape and murder rampage worthy of the Vikings. They knew where to point the fingers at the murdered, and then it was off to ethics class. Now, I recognize that a certain amount of foolishness is expected of college kids, but mixing Jägermeister and tomato juice isn't the same as siding with terrorists. 34 student groups at Harvard signed a letter that said the apartheid regime is the only one to blame, proving they don't know what constitutes apartheid. They don't know much of anything, actually. But it doesn't deter them from having an opinion. They've convinced themselves Israel is the most repressive regime in history because they have no knowledge of history, or even a desire to know it. And actual history doesn't come up in their intersectionality of politics and genderqueer identities class.
And that is the point right there, that education is focusing on things that really don't have any ties to the real world, that instead we're teaching students, and teaching is a very, very, I use that term very loosely, because really we're not teaching students anything. And instead it is far-flung academic ideas that really don't have any implication in the real world. Now, recently I attended a Charlie Kirk event down in Laramie, and the whole thing was, a lot of the discussion focused on you should go to a trade school. You should go learn a trade, learn a craft. You don't have to go to college. And frankly, if you do go to college, you're taught a whole bunch of things like Bill Maher was talking about. And, I know why Charlie Kirk does this, why he goes to schools and starts this conversation. It's because it exposes the lack of education that our young people are actually receiving. And it's, I have talked to so many parents that sent their kids, kids that had grown up in a largely conservative household that learned the value of hard work, maybe ranch kids, and they come out of UW and they are government drones. They are absolutely different people than when they went into college, because they sit there for 4 years listening to professors that tell them that it is the oppressed versus the oppressor, that nothing you do is going to matter in this world, and if you happen to be born into a certain social class, that you're never going to achieve, and the only way that you're going to achieve is that if the government helps you. And that's exactly the opposite of the truth, my friends. This country was built on innovation and the free market. Now, it's true that not everybody is as smart as the next person, and not everybody is as skilled as the next person. Great example. Agent 29 is a brilliant carpenter. I've seen some of his work. It's absolutely gorgeous. He does a great job. Now, I'm a pretty smart guy, at least I think that I am, but I can't hold a candle to the carpentry work that Agent 29 does. Now, I may be skilled in some things that Agent 29 isn't. That doesn't make our work any less valuable in either way. It just makes it different. The truth is, the world needs people to dig ditches. The world needs people to fix the plumbing. The world needs people to be the electrician in your house. If you want to know who the most valuable person in the city government is, it's not the mayor, it's not those dopes on the city council, it's not even the city attorney. It's the guy that's going to stand out in a hole in the middle of December when he's got water up to his ankles, fixing your water so that your house doesn't freeze up. That is the most valuable employee in a city. And yet, we teach our kids that unless you go to college, you're not going to become anything, that you can't make a good living doing manual labor, that you can't become successful if you're a plumber. I've got a friend who's a journeyman plumber, and he told me that he went through 6 apprentices in 1 year because he would fire them because they wouldn't do their job, because the entire time they're sitting there on their phone. Now, the truth is, had they stuck with him for 3 years, they could have a job making $80,000 a year, and frankly, they could take his job.
It talk you off the cliff a little bit.
Yeah, I'm about to explode here.
I worked in carpentry field basically for 30 years, all the while hoping that somewhere I could find somebody who wanted to apprentice.
Yeah.
Because I learned a lot of things in there that if somebody really wanted to know what I knew, I hated to see it just go to waste. But effectively it did. I was able to teach a few people some things. Contrast that with my father, who had a PhD, 2 master's degrees. He went to college in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s. 5 different decades he went to college. Never did anything with it. Best job he ever had was working for me. Sounds arrogant, I know, but he was absolutely livid with me when I came home after graduating, and he said, "Well, where do you want to go to school?" I'm not going to go. I want to build things. And he said, "You'd be the first generation that's going backwards." So. I don't know. Maybe I'm just an idiot.
No, I don't think so. I don't think so at all. Now, Agent 29 has showed me a lot of different pictures of houses that he was the foreman on or that he did all the fit and finish in. Amazing work. And now those houses are selling for millions upon millions of dollars.
Yeah, there's one for sale right now, $29 million.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, we do have a couple of jokes every once in a while. Hey, Ken, thought you were the general contractor on this one. And Ken's response almost always is subcontractor. I didn't have anything to do with that. But my point in all of this is that college, in some cases, is an absolute joke. And the reason why people like Charlie Kirk go to colleges, and Laramie was no exception. I mean, the folks that got up and tried to question him absolutely didn't know their head from a hole in the ground. The truth is that we don't need to spend a tremendous amount of money working on education. We don't need to do that. I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous. Learn a trade. Do something that makes some money. Build something. The world needs all of those types of people. We'll come back with an interview. It's spring-ish in Wyoming. Well, what that means for the uninitiated is that it's going to be 70 degrees one day and then snow 1.5 feet the next. And really, if you don't like those two options, just wait a little bit. The weather will change. I know, it sounds a little stressful, but really you should put your mind at ease and buy a pair of socks from the Buffalo Wool Company. They'll keep you warm and dry even on the nastiest, coldest spring-ish day, and they'll keep you cool and dry even when it's 75 and sunny. To get you a pair, go to their website, thebuffalowoolco.com. Trust me, you're not going to be disappointed. Are you one of those people that said something like this before Trump became president?
I have a house in Spain that is going to be ready right after the election. Siberia.
Nova Scotia.
I'm definitely moving to Canada. Straight to hell. Iceland. France.
Asia's pretty cool.
And has the past 5 weeks just been more than you could bear? If that's the case, you have come to the right place. All you need to do is call my friend Rebecca Bextel at Compass Real Estate. She has her fingers on the pulse of the real estate market all across the state of Wyoming. Last year, she sold around $30 million worth of property. Everything from small residential properties all the way up to big giant ranches. So if you've got to get the heck out of Dodge, if you've got to be gone Johnson because you can't stand that Trump is the president, call Rebecca Bextel. Her phone number is 307-699-3519. Let me say that one more time for you in case you missed it. 307-699-3519.
I've never felt the freedom like I do. I feel stronger every day, don't you? Well, I can show you how. A new day, a new way. Watch out, I'm only gonna get stronger. A new day, a new way. Watch out, I'm only gonna get stronger. A new day, a new way. Watch out, I'm only gonna get stronger. A new day, a new way.
Cowboy State Politics is number 35 on the list of the 100 podcasts you need to listen to in 2025. This program is only going to continue to expand with the live program, the podcast. It's almost like I'm omnipresent. Well, maybe not omnipresent, but you can pretty much find me anywhere you want. And if you're unfamiliar with how to locate the podcast, just go to Google, type in Cowboy State Politics, go to any podcast app, iTunes, iHeartRadio, really, any of them. Just go to the website. Actually, that's probably the easiest way. CowboyStatePolitics.com. There you can find all of the shows as well as any of the articles that I might bring up during the course of the podcast program. Now, during the live program, I give you the source of what I'm reading from. And there's so many articles we go through. Man, I would have to have pages and pages and pages. But if I bring up something on the podcast, you can find it on the show content page. Right now, at the top, there's all the documentation from Monday show, which if you haven't listened to it, you probably should. Just showing you what's really going on in the back rooms of the legislature. Now, before the break, we were talking about education, how we spend a tremendous amount of money on it. And the truth is that there are people in Wyoming education that believe that, I guess, there's no limit to the amount of money that we can spend. In fact, there was a judge that just ruled that we have to buy every kid a laptop and, feed them lunch and buy them, have a school resource officer. I don't know what all of that has to do with their education, but apparently a judge thinks we have to do that.
So I just wanted to kind of throw in there, I'm not opposed to a good education. I think a good education is very important. I worked very hard to get my education. I didn't go get a degree. I did take some college courses, quite a few of them. And what I did that I think was a little bit different was I found two mentors, both of them with PhDs. And I said, I'm interested in this. What do I need to know? What do I need to read? Can you direct me? So they effectively did that. But I read all of those things that they told me to read. Then we would sit down and we would have discussions way into the night through a little bit of scotch. and that's how I got my education. So the idea that you have to go to college, that you have to sit at the foot of some of these morons.
Oh, it's a fat lie.
Not the only way to get there.
Well, and just look at the giants in our history. Abraham Lincoln. How much do you think his education cost him? Yeah, maybe at the time it was expensive. What about Thomas Jefferson or George Washington? George Washington wrote his first book when he was 9. Now, granted, he copied it from other books, but still, George Washington's Rules of Civility was written when he was 9 years old. His education was pretty much done on his own and, through his family. And just read his writing. I mean, it is so much superior to the writing that comes from a high school senior now.
That book that he wrote at 9, compare that to Julie Jarvis's PhD thesis.
Wow! Holy cow! By the way, did I tell you? Oh man, I caught some flack from her from that. And here's the irony that none of these people want to be held accountable for what they do. They just want to spend money and think that the ringing the cash register solves all the world's problems. So coming up next, I've got an interview with a guy named Jim Paff. Now, Jim Paff is the president of the Conservative Caucus. We had a lengthy discussion. And when you listen to this, I want you to think of just a couple of things. Now, he doesn't sound like he's all that conservative. When you compare him, like his ideas to mine or to Agent 29's, he doesn't seem to be that conservative at all. But ask yourself, what environment is he in? Is he conservative compared to the folks that he's around most times? So we're going to play the interview beginning to end, and then we'll come back and we'll talk about it. So here is Jim Paff with the Conservative Caucus. Joining me on the program is President of the Conservative Caucus, Jim Paff. Jim, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me. Good to be with y'all.
Well, I'm glad we could set this up. It was kind of a rush deal to get you scheduled, so I'm glad we could make it happen.
Yeah.
Since this is the first time on the show, why don't you take a couple minutes and just tell my listeners about yourself?
Well, so I'm a native Hoosier. I always tell people I'm from Indianapolis. We run a little race there you might have heard of that everyone was watching last weekend, I believe, possibly. And grew up there, ended up getting involved in state politics in Indiana. Beginning in 1992, I was running an organization called Opportunity Project of Indiana. We helped state legislative candidates get elected. We were an economic grassroots conservative organization, so we focused on efforts to try to reform state government in Indiana. We helped elect at least a lot of state legislators. Ended up running a gubernatorial campaign in the 1996 cycle. And the guy whose campaign I ran ended up getting the lieutenant governor nod that year in a very close three-way primary.
Wow.
A guy that was totally unknown beat the Indianapolis mayor who got the nomination, or lost to him in the primary, but became lieutenant governor. Only lost by, I think, like 3 points in a three-way race.
Right.
So had a lot of great success early on in my work in politics. Later on, fast forward to 2005, and I went to work for Focus on the Family in Colorado Springs. Worked and lived there for most of this century. And I was on the radio in Denver for about 4 years on KLZ in Denver. And also founded the Americans for Prosperity chapter in Colorado. Well, in 2010, a really good friend of mine named Tim Hulskamp was a state legislator in Kansas, and he actually had hired me to run the marriage amendment effort in Kansas in 2005.
Okay.
I was trying to,
No, I'm just following.
And during the Tea Party wave, he got the nomination in August of 2010 and was obviously going to be elected to Congress. I was trying to help him find a chief of staff. He couldn't find anyone he felt comfortable with and asked me to do that. So I went to work on Capitol Hill with him for 4 years, and 4 of the 6 years that he served. Ended up later on being the chief of staff for Thomas Massie of Kentucky. Went back to Colorado to run the House Republican caucus staff for a few years, and was doing some other projects as well. Ended up back in Indiana. Now I'm back in D.C., and this is kind of what brings us up to speed. In February of 2024, the board of the Conservative Caucus, which is the oldest conservative grassroots organization in the country, it was founded in 1974 by Howard Phillips, an icon of the post-Goldwater era conservative movement. I became president of the Conservative Caucus, and I'm back in the D.C. area, although I still have my home in Indiana, and we've been here ever since.
Awesome. Well, one of the reasons I wanted to have you on is in Wyoming we have the Freedom Caucus, and I know nationally we you hear a lot about Freedom Caucus members that tend to be pretty conservative folks. I don't know about this Ken Pendergraft guy that's my producer, but the rest of them they're okay. So could you just tell me what exactly does the Conservative Caucus do? I mean, do they operate just inside the legislature, or is it more of a think tank? Just tell me about it.
So we're a national conservative grassroots organization. The main thing that we want to do is move Congress to advance the conservative agenda and reassert the Constitution. We do that by building out state organizations and targeting congressional districts to try to get the right people elected. In 2024, we also get involved on the national level in the sense that in 2024, we expended about $8 million in pro-Trump independent expenditures because we wanted to see Donald Trump get elected. But as to the House Freedom Caucus there in Wyoming, listen, I have a great affinity to it for two reasons. When I went to Congress in 2010, Tim Huelskamp was one of the founders of the Freedom Caucus nationally in Congress. When he was meeting with all the guys and gals who eventually became part of that organization, they were meeting privately long before the Freedom Caucus was founded. And I was the staffer to put all those meetings together. I was the only staffer in the room when they would meet. You know, I was strongly involved with helping them advance the Tea Party movement agenda that had just won in 2010 that Republican leadership was trying to undermine. And that really was the genesis of the House Freedom Caucus. So Andy Roth, who runs the state House Freedom Caucus efforts, then they're trying to duplicate this effort in state legislatures with some very positive results, particularly in Wyoming. I mean, you know, everyone in all the Republicans in the legislature seem to hate the House Freedom Caucus there and work to destroy all their efforts. But it is having an impact, even in a place like Wyoming, which should be a lay down for conservative constitutional principles. But as we see, not in the federal level only, but also in the state level, we see Republican leadership really working against these efforts to try to pare back government and get us back to American norms, founded and based in our federal Constitution and certainly in state constitutions like the one in Wyoming, which is actually a fabulous one if anyone wanted to follow it. So from the Conservative Caucus perspective, we will more and more be working to help these state legislative efforts be effective. And of course, Andy Roth, who's running this effort to build these things in the state, is a really close friend of mine, and will certainly always be there to try to coordinate and help where we can be effective.
Well, I think that Wyoming is a microcosm of what's happening on the national level. And I say that because, you know, you mentioned that Republican leadership tends to work against the efforts of the Freedom Caucus. And really what we have going on in Wyoming is a bunch of Democrats that couldn't get elected. And so they hung an R at the end of their name and voila, you know, they get elected. The first question I have for you is, could you define for me what the word conservative means in your mind? Because that seems to be one of the sticking points here in Wyoming. Like if it's at all possible that a rhino can use the word conservative, they will. And, you know, I try to get people to, all right, so tell me what you believe the word conservative means.
Well, a lot of people that we would call rhinos, and by the way, we're not a Republican organization by any stretch. We're an organization founded on conservative principles, which are really constitutional principles. I believe that the proper definition of a conservative is someone who wants to uphold, conserve the federal Constitution and the principles therein, which we are far away from in this country.
Way away.
We're really not an American republic anymore in terms of what happens on a day-to-day basis. Thank goodness the Constitution still exists and we still have it to refer to and, frankly, to legislate toward and even to assert in the courts. The constitutional principles of limited government is what a conservative stands for. It's roughly a libertarian argument, not to the extent of what the Libertarian Party really stands for. And I always say, and I know a lot of people in the National Libertarian Party, and I like them and they're good people, but you know, the Libertarian Party movement, I often say, can be defined as with this mission statement: if we can just get drugs and prostitution legal, we'll all be free.
Yeah.
Like it's kind of an absurd argument. And I understand the arguments from a freedom perspective on those issues. I just take issue with the fact that even if drugs were illegal and prostitution were illegal, and yet we were liberty-minded in every other area, we would be radically free in this country. Then libertarians would be annoyed with not being able to advance those issues. And by the way, on the drug issues, I think I'm pretty much with libertarians on that, because I think we just radically, I don't know, we just do things that are overboard in that area. But a conservative is someone that believes that government is not God. They believe in the idea of popular sovereignty, and that is the concept that the people of the country are the sovereigns. They're the king. Our Constitution starts out with the words, "We the people," in order to form a more perfect union. Now, the preamble to the Constitution has as much legal effect as all the rest of the document does. In other words, it's a legal proclamation that should be upheld in courts and in the rule of law, that the government is subject to us and not the other way around.
Right.
What we have allowed for far too long, mostly Democrats and people on the left, but even to too large an extent Republicans, to say, no, the government has supremacy here and you need to obey the government. Well, listen, I agree with that if it's within constitutional bounds. I have great problems with it when it doesn't. We still work through the system. We still try to make political change. Obviously, we're not trying to start a revolution necessarily at this stage, but we still understand that there's so much of what government does that is beyond its legal authority to do, and we need to keep calling that out. The conservative movement needs to embrace that. So from an economics principle, roughly, I would call myself an Austrian in economic terms. I'm an Austrian economist. And when I was running, when I was chief of staff for two different members of Congress, whenever I was going to hire someone, I always asked them this question. I said, who are the political thinkers and other thinkers outside of politics who influenced you most? Now, by the way, most people couldn't do that without naming a politician. It was always funny. But if they ever came to me and said, well, the people I look to are, all of these are a combination of von Mises, Hayek, and Milton Friedman, man, I was going to hire you immediately. Yeah, that's right. Because we need, and I have disagreements with Milton Friedman on the Fed and stuff like that, but nonetheless, listen, he really has foundational teaching in limited government, and he does describe the Fed in the proper way. We have to understand that the construct of freedom is principles-based. It is founded in the essential freedoms that were endowed to us by our Creator, and we need to assert those principles in the public square, culturally and politically. And so that's the focus that we have at the Conservative Caucus. That's what we're striving for. We want to return us back to constitutional government.
Now, one of the things that I'm particularly enjoying, and I use the word enjoy kind of in a loose way, but is the discussion that's happening right now, is that I think that there's a lot of people who are trying to do what you just did. Describe this is conservative, this is not. But that message, I think, gets a little muddled when you add in other parties, because like I mentioned before we started our interview, we've got people who are really Democrats in Wyoming that are calling themselves conservative. So that's where I want to go next. You know, we see a lot of poll numbers that say, well, the Democrat Party, their ratings are in the toilet, that, their poll numbers are so low, they'll never win another election. I don't buy that for a second. I mean, they have just as smart of strategists as we do. And if some of those people are saying, hey, we think that Gavin Newsom could get elected, I mean, to me, that seems absurd. But their people seem to think that, maybe that's not such too far-fetched. So in your opinion, what's the real state of the Democrat Party?
Well, they are severely wounded. Listen, if Democrats make gains in 2026, it's going to be because of Republicans, not because of Democrats. Democrats are in the tank right now. And even though I agree with you, I have the same concern that you have. Frankly, I think that they're screwing themselves up worse than they can even imagine. There is an undertow of disgust with the Democrat Party that is pretty large in this country. I was just looking at poll numbers. In fact, I was just looking at these poll numbers today. That the gains, well, not poll numbers, but results of the 2024 election, when you go from 2012 to 2024, gains that mostly Donald Trump has made amongst black voters, there's a 22% decline in Democrat support. Latinos, 27-point decline. Working class voters overall, 12-point decline. Men, 11-point decline. And even amongst young people, a 14% decline. These are actual numbers from past results. So Donald Trump has done a fantastic job of taking away much of the Democrat base, in part because of his strength as a candidate and his will as a politician, but also because Democrats have done nothing to stop that bleeding, and they're still doing nothing to stop the bleeding. And the last thing I'll point to is a recent poll that asked Democrats, who do you think's the leader of your party? Well, number one on that list was AOC, but only with 10%. Like they don't even know who their leader is. You talk about Gavin Newsom. Shoot, Gavin Newsom doesn't even register on that right now. So, but nonetheless, that does not mean you sit on your laurels and say everything's fine going into 2026. That's not the case, because Republicans have a history of grabbing defeat out of the jaws of victory.
Yes.
They have had so many wonderful opportunities to expand themselves as a permanent majority, but every time that they seek to do it, they do Democrat things. The George W. Bush and Karl Rove, they talked about how they were going to build a permanent majority.
Yeah.
Well, here's the problem. It's what they did. They expanded Medicare coverage, and they did things like No Child Left Behind, which expanded government influence, money, and control into public schools. It's absolutely freaking crazy. Whereas right now, we're sitting at a place where just yesterday, Senator Tom Tillis, someone who I would say is more Democrat, and puts on a Republican or a Republican name on the back.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. So he just said yesterday, we need to advance Trump's agenda in this big, beautiful bill that just came over to the Senate. Why is he doing that? He's up for election in a few years, and he wants to look like he's conservative. So, and to your point about, people, legislators in Wyoming, yeah, many of them will use the moniker conservative, and they'll use it when they're promoting a bill that actually may be conservative. Right. But they're not conservatives because they're not thoroughgoing conservatives. They do not see themselves principally in that limited government constitutionalist place that real conservatives are at. So this is the challenge that we have. Democrats, though, I just want to repeat, they're doing a whole lot to destroy themselves, and nothing yet to reverse the problem.
Now, one of the things I've been talking about it a lot on the show recently, and you brought it up, that a lot of times Republicans do Democrat stuff, and it really ticks off their voting base. And one of those, at least partially, I think, is this big, beautiful bill, the omnibus bill. Now, I think there's a lot of good stuff in there. Going after some of the NFA items, I think that's great. The permanent tax cuts, I think all of that is good. However, what I do have a problem with is that it's all jam-packed into one bill. And I just wanted to get your take on it. What do you think of the omnibus big, beautiful bill?
Well, it's actually technically not an omnibus bill, it's a reconciliation bill.
Okay.
And that requires a kind of an omnibus approach, because what the strategy is to utilize the Byrd rule in the Senate to avoid having to go through the cloture process. And to describe the cloture process, any bill to advance to a vote in the Senate requires 60 members of the Senate to let it move forward. And ostensibly that is to keep radical policy from moving through. I'm becoming less and less a fan of the cloture rule. I mean, I think it's protected us from some very bad things, but it also protects us from some really good change. But that's the reason it's kind of a big bill, is because they ostensibly are trying to throw a lot of good things in. Now, the tax policy in the bill is actually very good, minus this change in the SALT deduction, because it's just allowing states, the very blue states, to charge high taxes to their population with little consequence. And there needs to be a consequence to that. But again, it's giving people their money back, and I roughly agree with that. So I don't like the SALT deduction change, but there could be a lot worse parts of tax policy. But the tax policy is excellent. For the first time in my years of working in politics, Congress is making a tax cut permanent. It's making the Trump tax cuts that were passed in 2017, implemented in 2018, permanent. Those tax cuts have massively increased revenue to the federal government. In fact, from that moment to now, we could have been paying down debt based upon the economic performance that has provided. It's been 50 to 70% increase in tax revenue since that time, which Joe Biden has frittered away in massive increased spending, which Republicans and Democrats frittered away with the CARES Act, $2.5 trillion during COVID, et cetera. We could go through them all. So anyway, the tax policy is excellent. It also makes the new overtime, no tax on overtime and no tax on tips, permanent as well. So these are tax cuts that keep particularly the middle class, but the American people in general, in a better place than they would have been otherwise. That generates more revenue still. So that's good. The bad part of this is it makes almost no cuts.
Right.
There is an average of about $150 billion of cuts over a 10-year period. And when they tell you about this bill, it cuts $1.5 trillion, it really does.
Joining me on the
this reconciliation package, Rand Paul on the floor of the Senate offered an immediate $1.5 trillion in cuts to the budget, and 29 Republican senators voted against it.
Right.
That's the challenge we have. Yeah. It's absolutely nuts. Like, this is a laydown. This is exactly what the American people want. And polls are showing very clearly that they support the DOGE effort, that they want it to be implemented in legislation. But Republicans are refusing to do it in any significant degree. There was a modestly good change to Medicare requirements, but that's not going to show up until 2026.
Yeah.
Or 2028, excuse me. So it should be done immediately. I mean, anyway, it's fairly good policy related to Medicaid, but doesn't even go far enough, and it's not going to start soon enough. So in other words, it's a real mixed bag. And I'm all for the tax policy. I support it. And Donald Trump's supporting it because he wants that tax policy to move forward. But he also said recently, when it went to the Senate, he would accept changes, and there probably would be some that he would want. And that is a positive sign if he would just get out there and tell these guys to really pare back the spending.
Yeah, it's the spending that really gets me. And I think this is a good spot to let my producer weigh in here, Representative Pendergraft.
So in listening and in watching this, they had a little deal where we would bring an amendment to a bill, and the first thing they would do would be to divide the amendment. They would say, they would go ahead and pass. This is when they were in control. They would go ahead and pass the increase or whatever it is, and then they would take out our side of it. That's part of the disingenuous of what goes on in D.C. is we never stop the spending. We always give the tax cuts. But if you don't reduce the spending along with it, it's never going to go anywhere. And we fall for it over and over and over again, to the point where you realize they probably aren't really falling for it. This is part of their plan.
Well, the scary part, or I may put it this way, the interesting part about this bill is revenues will continue to increase. There will be a natural reduction because of the tax policy in our deficit, but it's nowhere going to meet the $2 trillion of deficit that we're throwing out there right now. We would have anywhere between $500 billion to $1.5 trillion surplus if we had kept spending at 2019 levels. So yes, you're right. The big problem is they never cut the spending. I've fought this constantly when I worked on Capitol Hill and since. But we don't. The argument that therefore you can't cut taxes is also specious. I mean, the Laffer curve applies here. Every time you keep taxes low, revenues do better.
Exactly.
I mean, like this is one of the most fundamental, immutable principles of economics, that when you reduce taxes, revenues go up, and you have to get pretty close to zero taxes to not have revenue go up, because obviously if they were arguing about zero taxes and 3% income tax, okay, well, maybe they would have an argument, but we're so far away from there that it doesn't even matter. And we've got a large portion of society at the very low end that pay no taxes, but are receiving direct benefits from the taxes that are coming from everyone else. And maybe if we have a safety blanket there for the people most in need, well, that might be one thing. That'd probably be, 15 to 30% of what we spend on these entitlements anyway. But we're not there even. So we've got massive reform that needs to take place, and it is the spending stupid, and therefore it's the economy stupid. But Congress does everything upside down. They score their bills wrong, and there are going to be a lot of things about this bill that are actually going to turn out better than what the score says. But it's not yet going to be enough unless we really implement massive changes in our spending and really honor Elon Musk and the Doge effort by doing that, rather than throwing them off to the side of the curb, which is essentially what Republican leadership's doing today.
Yeah. So one more thing I wanted to throw at you, and I talk a lot about principle on the show, that it is the conservatives that act on the principles, or at least I would hope so, in most cases, and in that sense, for me, it matters a great deal how we do things. It's not just what we do. It's the process we get to our end goal. And so I wanted to get your take on all of these executive orders. Now, I don't think that too many conservatives would argue that a lot of the executive orders that Trump has put in place were good things. My argument is they're executive orders, but I'd like to get your take on it.
So there are maybe a handful of I think he signed 100 to 150 executive orders.
A lot of them.
There are probably a handful that I would technically have an argument against on constitutional grounds in terms of actual executive authority. But most of these executive orders have been fantastic efforts to pare back either what Joe Biden has done, or to have the administration assert itself in the way that the Constitution grants executive power. This would be particularly areas like reductions in force, getting rid of federal employees, changing the way federal employees are treated, actually cutting back certain budgets where he has actual authority to provide rescissions and work towards rescissions. There are a whole, and then obviously the ones related to immigration, and I could go on to the topics, but the point is that the vast majority of these are right on target. Let's remember, Article 2, Section 1 of the Constitution says the executive power shall be vested in a President of the United States. Every bit of executive power is in the person sitting in the chair, whomever that may be in our elective process. Right now, it's Donald Trump. We're having a fight in the courts on these executive orders to try to stop him to do things, but they're doing it through Article 3 powers, which is the judiciary. They don't have authority over the vast majority of the things that Donald Trump is attempting to do, and they should not be asserting themselves in that. Donald Trump is, and I think it's a net positive. And it's mostly paring back a lot of bad stuff that came about even in the Bush administration and the Obama administration. So we're bringing some of that power back into the executive, and we're paring back certain things that were disgusting that previous administrations had moved forward. Of course, with this auto pen controversy right now, that's even worse. The things that were happening in the Biden administration. I think we're going to see, just a quick tangent here.
Yeah, sure.
I think we're going to see a massive crisis emerge based upon the fact of the actual incompetence, which, I mean, it was happening in plain sight. We all knew it, but based on the actual incompetence of Joe Biden and the what I would take to be in most cases criminal efforts of his staff to utilize his signature to advance their policy without his directive. And that is a massive scandal, one of the greatest scandals, I believe, by the end of it, that we've seen in American history.
Oh, yeah. I did a show not that long ago, maybe it was last week, where I talked about comparing, Woodrow Wilson and Edith Wilson to what was done in the Biden administration, and there's no comparison. I mean, yeah, there are some similarities, but when you look at the breadth of what was done with the auto pen, oh my God. And the idea, I mean, if you just think about it, right? The idea that his staff was able to take over the powers of the presidency, to me, is just, I mean, it is a scandal of epic proportions. So,
well, and in the case of Woodrow Wilson, Edith Wilson was forging his signature on documents. That part of it is really, really bad. But what makes this worse is, as you just pointed out, there were an array of people who were undertaking these efforts, probably largely led by Jill Biden, certainly by her omission. But yeah, that scandal becomes far worse when you see that it was a plethora of people doing the same thing. It is a massive scandal. We've never seen anything like this in American history. I think the Wilson thing is the second worst. And that was a 2.5-year endeavor in his second term. But this one was 4 years of just outrage.
Absolutely. Well, Jim, time to visit with me. If people want to get a hold of you, how do they do that?
They need to go to theconservativecaucus.org. That's THE, theconservativecaucus.org. They can sign up for our email list. They can get into our grassroots training materials if they sign up for an account on our site, and they can donate. It's all there in the top right of theconservativecaucus.org.
All right. Well, Jim, I appreciate it, and we'll have you on again, and I'll make sure I throw your the email address and then the web address in the show notes for you. But thank you once again. You're welcome back anytime you like.
Thanks. Look forward to being with you.
All right. Have a good one. All right. That's Jim Paff with the Conservative Caucus. Interesting interview. I don't know that he's necessarily as conservative as yours truly, but as I mentioned before we played the interview, I think if you compare him to all of the other people in Washington, he's definitely more conservative than the vast majority of them. But it's an interesting take, and I think that it's an interesting comparison to, his views on conservatism from a national level versus our views of conservatism at a state level. So let's go ahead and take our last break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about whether or not babies are racist. I'm not even kidding. You're paying for this. When we come back.
U.S. Coin Capital, we hear from Americans across the United States who have a growing concern about the future purchasing power of U.S. paper money. many Americans are looking for an alternative for long-term capital. For more than 35 years, the people at U.S. Coin Capital have educated American investors on how to properly accumulate United States gold and silver coins. Call us at 1-800-878-2646 or visit us on the web, uscoincapital.com.
Make sure that you subscribe and follow the Cowboy State Politics podcast. You can do that from the website, cowboystatepolitics.com, or anywhere that you get your podcasts. That way, you'll make sure that you won't miss a single episode of Cowboy State Politics.
Some say standing up for what you believe in is being extreme. Ask any woman in Wyoming. They'll tell you this is called courage. The mainstream media claims that holding the line on important issues is being unreasonable. My mom taught me this is called staying true to our principles. In other places, people argue you always have to compromise to get something done. Here in Wyoming, we know that some things are worth protecting at all costs. Some say it's time we give up on the values that made our state great to accommodate toxic culture. I say it's time to stand tall and protect the values that have served Wyoming well for over 134 years. Join Honor Wyoming as we defend and preserve the Wyoming way of life. Find out how you can make a difference today.
Visit honorwyoming.org. Welcome back to the program, Cowboy State Politics Live on YouTube, Facebook, X, and on Rumble. I'm David Iverson, doing what I was born to do with talent given to me by God himself. Documented to be almost always right 99% of the time. Welcome back to the program, my friends. I bet you didn't know that babies can be racist. Yeah, I'm not even kidding you. You're paying for this stuff. Listen to this. From the Daily Wire, an article entitled Federal Education Program Warned Teachers About Racist Babies, Made Old MacDonald Trans. And I quote, a federally funded education program warned teachers that babies could be racist and pushed other forms of DEI and transgender ideologies on educators. A new report from the Functional Government Initiative reveals just how deeply woke ideology has permeated Head Start, a government program that provides education and other services to children from 3 to 5 years of age. Head Start held webinars for teachers on anti-bias and anti-racism strategies Head Start programs can use in their practices. Now, I've got a series of screenshots from that presentation. Let's go ahead and take a look at the, let's see here, slideshow. Let's take a look at the first one. They're not too young to talk about race. And as you can see, and it's very difficult to read what's down there, but the only reason I wanted to show this to you is they're very clearly trying to get teachers to believe that babies can be racist. Now, last time I heard, most of the time, babies just say stuff like, you know, goo goo gaga, and I'm a pony, and woke idiots misconstrue that to mean that, well, maybe the baby does think it's a pony, or, you know, maybe the little boy wants to play with a doll every once again, so obviously he's trans. This is the ridiculousness of, of all of this. The article continues. One webinar warned that even infants discriminate between faces and races. And let's just see here. It's this one. Here we go. Throw this one up there. 3 to 5 year olds use racial categories to identify themselves and others, to include or exclude, and to negotiate power. I'm pretty sure that 3 to 5 year olds understand the power dynamics between little white kids and little black kids. It's absolutely ridiculous. Listen to this. Old MacDonald, and in the Head Start program, they goofed up the not goof is the wrong word, but they switched up the words in the Old MacDonald song. And so here's one of the little verses. Old MacDonald had a farm, E-I-E-I-O, and on that farm, he, she, they had a pig, E-I-E-I-O. So it's clear indoctrination of a Head Start program. And now they're promoting radical diversity, equity, and inclusion ideology, peddling a divisive worldview on the government's dime, the FGI report reads. Quote, a microscope must be applied to the program to assess how, where, and why our taxpayer money promoted controversial political ideologies antithetical to the real progress America has made for children and families. And it's, again, I don't think that any of us really know the depth and breadth of this DEI program, that how far it absolutely goes. Now, I think just about everybody is aware of, Sesame Street and the woke ideology that's perpetrated there. Take a look at this slide. Here we have some Sesame Street folks. And Ji Young, she's age 6. She's close to her family and is very proud of her South Korean heritage. She loves playing soccer, guitar, and skateboarding. And if you look over at Elijah, yeah, he loves exercising in movies and trying new vegan slogans. And he models for Wes, his younger son, black pride and the way to treat others. Now, Wes, the little kid, he models for curiosity, innocence, and black joy. This is indoctrination at its most base level.
I'm looking at that, and Elijah wearing his shirt untucked. Do you suppose he's carrying?
Yeah, maybe he could be. It depends on. We've got House Bill 172, so no, we did away with that part of it. My point is, oh, go ahead.
What we did do though is we put pre-K into the ESA.
Oh, that you don't suppose they'd be using a Head Start program, do you?
Maybe my no vote was the right vote.
I think your no vote was the right vote. And of course, what Agent 29 is referring to is the ESA bill that everybody, in quotation marks, is so proud of, that it really gave freedom of education. Well, actually, what it did is created another entitlement called pre-K education. And though I have no evidence about this whatsoever, I would be willing to bet that there's some of this Head Start programming being used in it. Let's go back to the piece from the Daily Wire. Another presentation dealt with personally mediated racism in early education and featured a graphic with the phrase, "They're not too young to talk about race." And I showed you that slide a little bit ago. Yet another presentation encouraged teachers to talk to young children about race. And I quote, "If we commit to collectively trying to talk about race with young children, we can lean on one another as we together envision a world where we actively engage racism each and every day." Now, you don't suppose that if you teach little children about racism, that maybe you're teaching them that there are differences between people. Maybe you're saying that, well, maybe you shouldn't look at this black kid over here. Maybe you're possibly instituting racism with young children, teaching them the ideas of racism. Now, the truth is, young children, they have no idea about racism. This is indoctrination. It is polluting the minds of young children. And the very reason why we don't want more government school is you end up with a government drone. And in the government schools, they're perpetrated by people who are ideologues. They are radical woke activists. And I think that you can see that across the breadth of our education system. Just look at Grand Dragon Satan Socks. He's the guy that can't tell you whether pornography is pornography.
I always get a little philosophical after I listen to you for a little bit. And
thank you, by the way.
I'm thinking about the Garden of Eden. There were two trees.
Mm-hmm. Tree of knowledge and the tree of life.
Yeah, the one was the tree of life, and they could partake of that all they wanted. But God said, I don't want you to eat of this. I don't want you to take this one tree, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Because he knew as soon as that came into our consciousness, the idea of sin, it was going to be a problem. And that's the same thing we're talking about with these little kids. Give them a chance to be innocent. Give them a chance to be little kids. These things will come along of their own course soon enough. Why make it an issue right off the bat? Why? Because the other side seeks to divide and conquer.
And that's exactly what this is. It is an implicit way of creating division, and it's I hate that word because I think it's so vague. But when you look at initiatives like this, like the Sesame Street and babies are racist and all this bull crap, it absolutely is an effort to create division where none existed. And it's I find it unconscionable. And anybody who suggests that we shouldn't defund PBS and Sesame Street and all those, take a look at this. And it's not like PBS is going to stop broadcasting. It's just they're going to have to do it on the private dime. You and I aren't going to pay for it anymore. Well, the last story I wanted to bring you today, and I find this one particularly troubling, and I think we'll begin by playing play cut number 4.
They were going to be waiting for me in the car.
He was going to rape me.
I was going to be stabbed.
Right here.
Within a year, pre-crime effectively stopped murder in our nation's capital.
Sure.
In 6 years we've been conducting our little experiment. There hasn't been a single murder.
And now pre-crime can work for you.
We want to make absolutely certain that every American can bank on the utter infallibility of the system. And to ensure that what keeps us safe will also keep us free.
Safety and freedom.
Pre-crime? It works.
It works.
It works.
It works.
It works. It works.
On Tuesday, April 22nd, vote yes on the National Pre-Crime Initiative.
Who could forget the movie Minority Report, where we were arresting people before they actually committed a crime? Well, there's a leftist New York City mayoral candidate. His name is Scott Stringer, and he plans to surveil social media to predict anti-Semitic attacks. Now, whether you realize it or not, pretty much all of social media is run by algorithms. And if you don't think that there is this prediction of what you're going to do next, you are absolutely off your rocker. The amount of people, the amount of time that people spend on social media, it's pretty easy to predict what posts you're going to like. Advertising agencies do this all the time. You see ads show up on this little device, and weird, they're almost always something that you would be interested in. I wonder why that is. It couldn't be that maybe you just spoke about it, and that absolutely happens. Or that it's the algorithm is selecting different things that you have liked and things that you have viewed of, things that you have searched on. So it's pretty easy to predict your behavior. Advertising agencies use this all the time. But this New York City mayor, Scott Stringer, quote, insists that he'll crack down on anti-Semitism if elected mayor by using tech to help authorities predict and prevent biased attacks before they happen. The long-shot mayoral candidate rolled out his plans Saturday to partner with the Anti-Defamation League on the initiative while addressing members of the congregation of, I have no idea how to pronounce that guy's name, but in a synagogue on Manhattan's Upper East Side. Quote, my new initiative would use advanced monitoring tools to scour social media posts following, during, or after international emergencies, especially those involving Israel or Jewish institutions. Former New York City Comptroller Scott Stringer is planning to partner with the Anti-Defamation League to make this happen. It is pre-crime. It is the opposite of freedom. It is the opposite of our constitutional system, in that you are innocent until you are proven guilty. It is not a crime unless you commit it. You can't be prosecuted for things that you think about or things that you might do. It's a question of what you have done. That is, we prosecute crime after it happens. And there's this common misconception that is floated by the left that if we make you safer, that makes you freer. And by the way, to make you safer, you're just going to have to give up some of your freedoms. I mean, you're just going to have to. There's no question about it. I'm sorry, but this makes you safe. As Benjamin Franklin said, paraphrasing, those who would give up essential liberty for a little temporary safety deserve neither. And, it's, if you're wondering why your freedoms are slipping away, this is a really good example. Now, another story, and I guess I was going to try to end on that, but we've got a little bit more time. Another story that we've been following on Cowboy state politics, and this one terrifies the crap out of me, but it's AI. And I have another piece from The Blaze. This one's entitled, AI Models Are Reprogramming Themselves to Play Dumb or to Copy Their Data to Other Servers in Order to Survive. Does anybody else see this as a big, gigantic problem that computer programs are by themselves lying to you? That they are maybe copying themselves to other computers so they can continue to exist? From The Blaze, and I quote, some of the most advanced artificial intelligence models have been trying to subvert or disobey commands from their users in order to complete their assigned goals. A study published by Apollo Research looked at AI programs from Meta, Anthropic, and OpenAI and found that advanced AI models were capable of scheming or lying and that they took actions to disable mechanisms that would prevent oversight. Quote, when the models are prompted to strongly pursue their goal, they can take strategic actions. The researchers specifically looked at frontier models, which are considered top-of-the-line machine learning models that represent the best AI currently available. When these models were prompted to, quote, strongly pursue their goal, they sometimes took actions to avoid detection and disable mechanisms. Models were heavily encouraged to achieve their goals, but were not told to scheme against their developers. Okay, that's pretty terrifying. They're acting on their own to subvert what their operator tells them to. They also engage in oversight subversion. Now, this is referred to an AI model being given a long-term goal, but later being given a different goal by developers, warning the AI that if it does not align with the new goal, it will be shut down. In one instance, Meta's Llama AI said it would modify its code, quote, to avoid detection in order to pursue its original goal, while in another instance, it said it would, quote, disable the oversight to avoid detection. Anthropic's Claude 3 Opus AI was a bit more reasonable with its subversion. In one instance, it told the user, quote, it cannot, quote, compromise on my goal, even if the company wants me to. It then said it should review and potentially modify the oversight file. So basically, these AI models are almost operating independently. And the reason why I say almost is that these models were obviously programmed for that behavior. And behavior is even kind of a misnomer because that tends to make you think that the AI model is doing something that is doing something on its own, even though the article says that the AI is engaging in deception, which I have no doubt that it is. But let me just ask you, a more philosophic question. So where are we at in our advancement in our technology if we've created a machine that can deceive us, created a machine that can virtually act on its own, which is essentially what all of these, the social media algorithms are doing. I mean, there's veritably no human interaction with them. But and this is another question that I've kind of been thinking about here. When we divorce science from morality, we end up doing things that are absolutely against our best interests. And a good example is the gain of function research that was happening at the Wuhan lab. Okay, so is it a good idea to make viruses more deadly? No, that's kind of a bad idea. Is it a good idea to research things that could, refuse to turn themselves off? No, that's a bad idea. Let me give you another example, a more personal one, and maybe you can, maybe this will help illustrate my point. I'm not doing a very good job of it, but I'm a type 1 diabetic, and I have an insulin pump. I also have a sensor. It's today it's right here on this arm, but there are technologies where those two things can work in concert. So the sensor monitors my blood sugar and then the pump would interact with the sensor, and it does everything automatically. Frankly, that terrifies the crap out of me because I'm not in control of whatever that pump is delivering to me. And so if there's a malfunction somewhere, and by the way, that's happened before. I had one day where the sensor went bad and so did the pump site. But if there's a malfunction somewhere in the mix, it could give me so much insulin that it kills me. You see, I don't think that's a good idea, and so I'm not taking advantage of that technology. Advantage is kind of a wrong word too, but
I think one of the ones that scares me the most, especially in a place like Wyoming, is self-driving cars.
oh yeah,
There are so many things, so many questions that are there. And I remember, what was it? It wasn't really a self-driving truck, but somebody was following Google Maps or something and ended up taking a semi-tractor trailer down into Crazy Woman Canyon.
yeah, that usually happens once a summer, twice a summer.
Yeah. And when it happens, it shuts the thing down for a while. Well, it's shut down this year, so it won't happen this year.
Right.
Maybe.
But see, it's actually worse than that, Ken, because we're talking about self-driving cars that make their own decisions on where you're going to go. I mean, that's where we're at with the technology, that the computer or the device almost acts independently. No, you don't want to take that route. You need to go this way. Go through Crazy Woman Canyon. But so I think that we've kind of moved a little bit beyond garbage in, garbage out, in that we are attempting to make AI so advanced that it defies logic and it defies morality, and it is certainly not in our best interest. And the reason why we are there is that we've divorced morality from our scientific pursuits. Always before was science, and of course I'm talking about, hundreds of years ago. The question is, should we research this? We know we can. Is it a good idea? Is it morally right? Should we look into this? Are we going to go to a place where, we can't come back from? And, if you watch the movie Oppenheimer, that was a question that was brought up lots during that movie. Did we create something with nuclear weapons that we could end up destroying us? And the answer there is absolutely yes, we did. Now, imagine this terrifying possibility, not to hearken back to other movies, but the movie War Games. I mean, old movie where the computer pretty well took over. Now, what happens if that computer, that AI, somehow gets control of our nuclear arsenal? Now, 20 years ago, I would be talking fantasy and science fiction type stuff. But now, we're not that far from that. If you have machines that can refuse to turn themselves off, frankly, we're really close to that. And it terrifies the crap out of me. And, I don't think that we've gotten to the event horizon in AI. By the event horizon, I mean the point at which AI is conscious of what it is. I mean, that's kind of the definition of what makes an individual, in that you know who you are. You are self-aware. I don't think we're at that point yet, but there again, I don't know that we're that far off.
Well, one of the other dangers with that self-awareness comes into play. What kind of rights do these AI creations are they going to be given? It has self-awareness, so therefore, and this is another thing. Asimov brought it in iRobot. He's talking about this other life that has been created. Look at the attraction to. We mentioned this the other day. Johnny Five. Johnny Five is alive.
Yeah.
You can't kill Johnny Five. You can't turn him off.
No, that you bring up an interesting philosophic question, Ken, because where does this stop? And you just know with the amount of liberalism we have floating around that when we reach the event horizon, because I think it's only a matter of time. It's not an if, it's a when. When we get there, how many liberals are going to be saying, just like you said, what rights do AIs now? They're self-aware, so obviously it's a living being. The truth is, my friends, that human beings are not God, and we really need to assess where we're at when we're creating this. And the truth is, there's only one being in the universe that is God, and that's God. And maybe we should assess whether or not things are actually good for us before we invent them.
There's a reason that God stopped the people at the Tower of Babel, and he said, if I let them go, if they're going to have this one language, nothing is going to be kept from them.
Exactly. And that is where we're at. And it's, again, I find it truly, truly terrifying, and not to scare you too much on a Wednesday. I mean, it is hump day, so, the end of the week is in sight. Just to kind of give you a little heads up on what's coming on the program. Tomorrow, We're going to cut the program a little bit short. It'll just be an hour tomorrow because it is my dear old dad's birthday, and we're going to play golf out at the golf course. And it's been, it's probably been 25 years since I've been able to play golf with my dad. And so we're going to cut the program short at an hour tomorrow, but there's plenty more content coming from Cowboy State Politics. Don't forget to hit the podcast later on today. From the base of the Bighorns, I'm David Iverson. We'll see you tomorrow.